This is the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, good night. It's morning where we are. This is Trevor Barrett, and I am here as an accessory to Paul Wilson. Paul, how are you doing?
Doing well. Definitely not the case, but yeah, I appreciate it. I'm doing well. Excited to talk with you today.
Well, I'm going to try to come up with different ways to do that. There was just, I don't know if you've seen it on YouTube, that David Tennant and Michael Sheen have this like little Zoom thing they do, and it's pretty funny. And in one of them, they were going back and forth on ways that they could bill themselves. David Tennant, notwithstanding Michael Sheen. There's a part of that too where they're like, oh, you must have been trying to get Martin Sheen. It's pretty funny stuff. Anyway, funny. Neither here nor there, but I thought that might be kind of funny to see what happens. So get ready for those.
All right. I'll keep on my toes then, I guess.
Well, we're here today to discuss a topic that I do really like, a topic that I find inspiring and peaceful and hopeful and existentially dreadful at times, but not necessarily a topic that I feel particularly well versed in. We're going to talk about nature writing today. We'll get there in a minute, but I guess first want to see how you've been doing, Paul, and ask you a question, what you've been reading. But go ahead and start with how you've been doing and then follow up with that. Yeah,
I've been doing well. I've been kind of, just our whole family basically has been vaccinated except our youngest, and he's 13. So, that just opened up where they could get vaccinated. So he got his first jab on Tuesday. So we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can we're still trying to be careful with him just to be safe, but it's just little things like, I've been in the library a couple times in the past week, and I had been doing like a curbside pickup for well over a year. And so just those little things that all of a sudden you start to say, oh, wait, maybe life is getting back to a little bit of normalcy. So yeah, it's been going well. How about you?
Been doing really well. Same situation here. We still have a few who aren't vaccinated, but they have been going to school. I mean, here in Utah, it hasn't been as bad as it's been in many other places. I think we've done pretty well. Not necessarily because of anything we've done, I don't think, maybe, but maybe just by virtue of the kind of state that it is, and we're all pretty spread out. But yeah, we've my wife and I are vaccinated, and we've been trying to get our boys in to get them vaccinated, but that hasn't been as easy to accomplish because we want it on their records, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we'll get there too. We will get there too.
Exactly. Making steps in the right direction anyway. But as far as what I'm reading, so a couple months ago on Twitter, I had, sometimes I'll kind of get stuck on a certain publisher, and I was thinking a lot about coffee house books. And, I read In the Distance by Hernan Diaz at one point, and that book is just amazing. And so I kind of threw it out to everybody and just said, like, what are some other coffee house books that are some of your favorites? And so I got a nice long list of books, but one name that came up more often probably than any other one was Brian Evanson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I had not actually heard of him. So, he'd been ever since then, he'd been kind of percolating. And so anyways, speaking of the library, the other day, I picked up one of his books called Song for the Unraveling of the World. And it's a series of short stories, which we talked about previously. And so, that I'm about halfway through this one, and it's really good. They're definitely horror stories. And I would say they kind of remind me a little bit of, I don't know if you know Thomas Ligotti. He's like a little bit older, maybe from the 80s and 90s horror writer. And then Samantha Schweblin. And then also maybe a little bit of some Jeff Vandermeer in there, because there's some kind of weird sci-fi weirdness that goes on. So anyway, I'm making my way through. Very unsettling. They're not necessarily gory, but they're more kind of psychological. Just weird stuff happens and kind of creepy stuff. So you're often kind of dropped into the middle of a story and kind of left to find your bearings. You don't really know what's going on. So I like that kind of thing. So yeah, so far so good. I would really recommend them. It's interesting. And he has several other collections of stories that I think I might pick up down the road. So
I feel like I do know the name Ryan Evanson. Maybe it's just maybe it sounds like a friend or something. Like it
I know.
Sounds like
it is one of those names. Yeah, I don't know. Based on what I'm reading, not that the author mirrors the work, but I don't know if you'd want to be friends with this guy. No, I'm just kidding. He's definitely got, like I said, just very unsettling, very creepy, kind of nightmarish, but in a very intriguing and fascinating way. So yeah, it's good stuff so far. How about you? What are you reading?
So I'm reading Molly Keane's 1981 novel, Good Behavior. It was just reissued by NYRB Classics. And so I've been going through that. And that, also maybe not a horror story, but maybe, a little bit, very unsettling, a little dark comedy. I don't know too much about it as far as, where it's going to go. I'd never really heard about it. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And it never registered. I've typed the shortlists for the Booker Prize many, many times. I've discussed shortlists with people on Goodreads, including that particular year. And this book has never really stood out to me as anything other than just there's that probably forgotten book. But fortunately, no, not forgotten. It had been released by the Folio Society maybe a decade ago with a really good introduction by Jane Gardam. And boy, this is something else. This is fun writing, kind of dark, and starts with a death in a kind of a creepy. I don't know. It's just weird, but yeah, that's what I've been reading. It's Molly Keane's Good Behavior, more like bad behavior, really. But
sounds like it. What year was that? Do you happen to know what year that was on the Booker finalist list?
The same year as Midnight's Children, so 1981. It didn't have a chance that year.
No, definitely not.
It's also the same year as some Ian McEwan. I mean, there are various other well-known authors and books that came out that year that were on that short list. And so I think that's why this one just always looked like that curiosity in the corner,
right?
That doesn't stand out. But this is something else. If you get a chance to grab onto this one, I would recommend it. It's really funny in a way that you're like, I should be chuckling about that. I think it's going to get darker. I think it's going to get less humorous as I go along, but I don't know.
Yeah. No, I love that about those long lists and not just for the Booker, but different prize lists. Like sometimes the book that won, you look back and you're like, oh yeah, that was a no brainer. But then a lot of times what I'll find is you look back at those lists and you kind of look between the lines and dig up some of those ones that didn't necessarily win. And in some cases, they turn out to be ones that you like even more than the winner. So it's always kind of fun to explore those. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, I like doing that too. On my Goodreads page, we do, we have done it. It's been a while since we've done it, but short list reads where we will go back and do a historical short list. And we haven't done 1981. I think we did 1980. We tend to do it by decade. Like, let's do one from the 70s. Let's do one from the 80s, 90s, and we'll go up and then we'll go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, cool. 2000s. And I participate as I can, which isn't terribly well.
Right. No, I like that
now
idea.
I can participate in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know what decade and year you're going to pick next time.
Exactly. I'll be voting for it. I've already read Midnight's Children. I've already read the McEwan, which I think is Comfort of Strangers. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Speaking of creepy.
Yes. Yeah. It seems like a pretty good short list once I put those things in there.
Absolutely.
Any purchases or books you've checked out from the library that look promising that maybe you're not reading or just want to bring up?
Yeah, I've had one of those rare periods where I've actually not really purchased very many books lately, which might explain my twice weekly library runs between me and our two boys. We and my wife too, of course. But we definitely burn through the books. So yeah, let's see. What have I been getting lately? I mentioned a couple of them last time that I've been reading. Give me a moment. Why don't you go over yours real fast? Yeah, let me try to remember the names of them.
So I was just going to bring up one, and I've talked with you a little bit about this on Twitter, but I always have to be banging the drum for Jonathan Stroud. He is a British children, young adult writer, but boy, these books are funny and great. He kind of got famous for the Bartimaeus trilogy. Yep. Which I have not read yet, but plan on doing it. But the one that I got sucked into, thanks to my wife, is the series of 5 books called Lockwood and Co. And oh man, I love these books. I loved it from the second that I started the first one, called The Screaming Staircase. They're kind of ghost stories, and this is turning more into a recommendation for Lockwood and Co. But I loved them so much since I read the last one a year or two ago. I've been very anxious to see what he would do next. And that book just came out in the UK. It's called The Outlaws Scarlet and Brown. And it comes out here in the US in, I think, September or October. But I couldn't wait. I had to buy it and import it from the UK.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my wife was the one who checked the mailbox that day.
Uh-oh.
And since she was the one who got me started, she gets the rights to read it first.
You deferred. You deferred.
Yes. Plus, I've got a lot of other things to read and going on, so I was more than happy about that. But yeah, The Outlaws Scarlet and Brown, Jonathan Stroud, new series. So I don't know how long it'll be or exactly where this one is going or what it's going to do. I don't know anything about it. Just very excited that he's got another one out.
Oh, that's cool. It's funny because you mentioned that series to me recently, and I had the Bartimaeus Trilogy, at least the first one, probably 15 or 20 years ago on my shelf. And I don't know that I ever actually picked it up, and I think it's currently sitting on probably my son's bookshelf. But after you mentioned this other series, Lockwood and Company, speaking of the library, I actually did check out all 5 of those for my 2 boys to read, and I plan on sneaking in and picking them up too. And our oldest, who's 16, has been tearing through them to the point where a couple of times there was one on hold, and he's like, "Dad, when are you going to go get the next one?" So yeah, I appreciate that recommendation and plan to steal them myself. And they sound really good.
I have, between my wife and I think everybody in our town has read them and loved them. Like we're always saying, Jonathan Stroud must be like, why is there this little place in Utah where my books are just going like hotcakes? But
that's
anyway,
funny.
So glad to spread it over to your neck of the woods in
Absolutely.
Colorado.
Yeah, maybe we can make the same thing happen here in Denver. So yeah, and then just to jump back, sorry, I had to look it up just to remember because like I said, we've been getting so many books, but one that I just picked up ties nicely into our conversation today, which is one that I heard about from Stephen Sparks, who is a bookseller at Point Reyes Books. And he tends to have some really good nature recommendations. And one that he had been reading is called A Most Remarkable Creature. And it's The Hidden Life and Epic Journey of the World's Smartest Birds of Prey by Jonathan Melberg. Huh. And so I just picked it up. And as we'll discover later in our conversation here, birds of prey seem to factor pretty heavily in some of my favorite nature books and then just in nature books in general. So his recommendation combined with the topic, I was like, I'm sold on that one. So yeah, I picked up that one recently. And then another one that I did just actually finish is the essay collection by Zadie Smith, which was a really short one that just came out during the pandemic. And it's very pandemic focused. It's very slim. And it is called Intimations. I don't know if you've heard about that one, but Zadie Smith, she is somebody who I struggle a little bit with her fiction, at least so far. That's never really connected well with me. But as far as essays, I would argue that she's probably one of the strongest essay writers out there right now. And this particular one, continues that tradition. It's really good. It's maybe only like 6 essays, probably, I don't know, it may be around 100 pages long. But anyway, yeah, that's another one I picked up at the library and read in like a day or two, and very good stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. I think you may have just disclosed maybe at least one of your books that you're going to be talking about later on. I may have the same one. We'll see. I
wouldn't be surprised if we have that one in common, if it's the one I'm thinking of.
Well, that's fine. That works out great. So let's talk nature books a little bit. Like I say, this isn't something that I seek out. Like I don't go to the nature section of a bookstore to the extent that it even exists. I don't even know. It's not something I've ever really sought out. These are more just serendipitous discoveries that I've had as I've picked up a book or two and really have enjoyed them. I wouldn't say as a kid growing up in Idaho that I ever really cared much about nature writing. It wasn't until maybe even just the last 15, 20 years that I've gotten into it. And part of that's because I moved away from the West. And I love the East Coast. I lived there for several years, loved it, and there's tons of beautiful nature.
Right.
But I started reading nature stories or books or essays set back in the West. And boy, did I get a hankering to come back. It was just insane how this all kind of started to well up in me. So I have been looking for it a little bit more lately. But I am curious, as nature writing is probably a really big, general, broad thing. And there are probably a lot of people out there who would say, well, nature writing is, 50 different fields. What are you guys even going to talk about?
Right.
And that's just, I guess, it. We'll probably be incredibly general in our definition. But what is nature writing to you, or at least what kinds appeal to you? What, is it an ecological or environmental approach?
Right.
Is it something that just makes you want to get out and hike or walk around, go to the garden? Is it just something that evokes a sense of wonder, or again, existential dread?
Right. No, it's funny. I mean, and I would say it's actually grown into all of those things. What I would probably say is I've always kind of, not necessarily strictly nature books, but I've always been drawn to kind of descriptions of the natural world in fiction and other books. You think of, just throughout my life, not all in this order, but, Moby Dick or Willa Cather or like even J.R.R. Tolkien, like some of his writing, I grew up reading those books and they had a huge influence on my early reading life. And going back, I was reading them to our boys over the past year, and some of those nature descriptions in there are just mind blowing. He's so good. So I think I've always been
descriptions. We could do a food one on that also focuses on Tolkien's food writing. Anyway,
exactly. No. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so I think it's always been something that I've been drawn to, but with me, as always, a lot of it is centered around the writing itself. The topics do matter, but to me, a lot of times if it's well written, it doesn't have to be like flowery, beautiful, but just well written and interesting. So yeah, it's funny. There's that stereotype of like the older you get, especially men, the more drawn you are to nonfiction, the whole dad book thing. And so far I've avoided the World War II, kind of biography thing. I have no plans in that direction necessarily, but it's definitely been true for me as far as nonfiction with nature books and even a little bit with science books. I think I like the escape and the peace of it. It's very peaceful. It does kind of inspire me. We live in Colorado, so it kind of does inspire me to get out and do a little more. But then more and more I've noticed there's also a bit of a sad tinge to a lot of nature writing now, some melancholy, due to obviously, like you said, environmental things, global warming, kind of that idea of what we're losing and what's already been lost. So, it puts a bittersweet element to it. But to me, it kind of sometimes feels like it's like documenting some of these animals and landscapes that we're losing. And so I don't know, there's a lot of layers to it. There's a peacefulness and there's a joy and a happiness, but there's also that other element, which I kind of appreciate, just the melancholy and also just the awareness, obviously, that brings. So yeah, you mentioned the nature section. Like historically, I'd always just kind of stuck to the, fiction section in a bookstore, but I will admit that more and more that, like, I'm sure to hit the nature writing or travel writing, sections, that's actually one of my go-to sections now. So I would say for me, at least, it actually has turned into an area that I specifically do seek out.
Oh, good. Well, I'm looking forward to your insights, and I'm sure more of these topics and more maybe what we were thinking of will come up as we discuss our list. We, as we've done in the last few episodes, and probably will continue to do to some form or another, we've got a list of 3 books or authors or whatever you want, essays. I'm not sure. We'll see what you did, but 3 kind of standouts for us. And these aren't necessarily my all favorites. And I thought, how do you make a list of nature writing books without, including just putting on there Walden or something like that,
right?
Or stuff by John Muir. And maybe, I don't know if you did. Did you put either of those on there?
I did not. List? I mean, if we do kind of an honorable mention again, I had Walden on there because Thoreau definitely. Yeah. I bought his letters or his essays, I guess it is, recently. That big NYRB collection, and he's there, but he's more of an honorable mention, at least in this particular discussion.
And I almost thought we could even just say, hey, here's the Henry David Thoreau list. Sometimes in film spotting they do these lists, and when there's one that just kind of stands out that they're like, well, obviously we could put that on there. If we're doing a top 5, let's just call this the that list in honor of that particular author or filmmaker or whatever, so that we don't have to do that.
Right. Exactly. I think that's a safe way to do it. But I could see this turning into, future episodes. Like, I think this is a topic where there's so many standouts that, you could do a whole series on just this one topic. So I'm looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Well, why don't we just go ahead and start then? And I don't know. Tell me how you made your list as you get into your number 3 or third, first one to mention today.
Right. So I wouldn't say that my bookshelves are especially well organized, but I try to kind of group things by topic. And so honestly, what I kind of did was just started kind of browsing around those sections where I kind of keep a lot of the nature writing. And then I did that and kind of looked over some of my lists from over the years of just standout books that I had rated really highly. And so from there, I kind of compiled this group. And the way I was thinking about it was, like I said, I've always been drawn to nature writing, but there's been a couple books within probably the last 10 or 15 years that have really sparked that interest. And I think they're part of the reason that I actually do seek out that part of the bookstore and make it like a focus now. And so I included a couple of those. And then I also included another one that I just kind of stumbled on recently where it's been around for a while, but it wasn't one that necessarily had built this love, but it's like continuing the love. So that was kind of my general thought process. How about you? What did you do?
I just tried to think of books that have made me really start to contemplate the world around me, not in a human sense, but in a general existence sense. Here we are all in this world, and with animals and the passage of time, and what ones have made me really become reflective on that. And so I all of the ones I have on here I didn't have any novels, but one of my honorable mentions is a novel, an actual novel that I think did that for me. But I just kind of focused on the ones that really make me kind of reflect on my place in this world, both in terms of its beauty as an observer, as well as just someone who's passing time here.
Right.
I mean, what that means. So that's how I did it. And then, scoured my shelves to see which ones popped out as I was thinking about that.
Exactly. No, I like that. Well, do you want to kick off with your first one, or?
Sure.
Okay.
So my first one, have you seen me talking about the Lauren Isley box set?
Not only have I seen you talk about it, you inspired me to buy it. It is sitting over there on my shelf looking at me right now. I have not read it yet, but you're the reason that I own it. So absolutely.
Let's see if we can have you crack it open sometime. Yeah. This box set that the Library of America released a few years ago collects several books and essays by Lauren Isley. I had never heard of him before this box set was announced. I didn't know who he was, but from about the 50s through the 70s, he's a scientist, but he came out with these this is why I call this the like Henry David Thoreau maybe list, because the epigraph that he puts at the beginning is Henry David Thoreau. Many of the books that I considered have that exact same thing. But this is a 2-volume box set that it's called Collected Essays on Evolution, Nature, and the Cosmos. And it collects his books, and several of them were either nominated for or won the National Book Award. Oh, wow. This is the real deal. This isn't just some, Henry David Thoreau wannabe. Lauren Isley was just this poetic mind as he's looking at the world around him. And I wanted to start particularly, I know, I'm kind of pushing the whole box set, but the one that I wanted to highlight is called The Immense Journey from 1957. It's kind of his breakout. I think the year before he had done a biography on Charles Darwin. So you can kind of see, this is a guy who's got his mind in all this. The Immense Journey is a collection of essays. Again, I'm not sure if I said it, but published in 1957, where he talks about nature, but again, from the perspective of just an observer here. And he starts it with an essay called The Slit. And it's an introduction to the whole book. I mean, it's not just an essay that he published somewhere and then, I'll throw it in this book. This is, this book holds itself together really well with things talking about, things coming up or things that have already happened. But The Slit is about this slit in rock where if you get in there, you can see into the past. And, of course, we've heard all of that before. But in particular, he says, I squatted on my heels in the narrow ravine, and we stared a little blankly at each other, the skull and I. He sees a skull back in this slit. There were marks of generalized primitiveness in that low, pinched brain case and grinning jaw that marked it as lying far back along those converging roads where, as I shall have occasion to establish elsewhere, a cat and man and weasel must leap into a single shape. So he's just talking about how all of this has come about even, his is the long view. And he talks about this creature, because it's not a human, but it's getting close to that. And he says that the creature had never lived to see a man. And what was it that I was never going to see? Oh, wow. What's coming up in the future of this world that will make it so that man doesn't even see it or have the imagination to contemplate it? This particular essay collection talks a lot about water and about all of its life-giving properties, but not just that, but how the rainfall that you hear at night just outside is actually a Niagara Falls. We just can't see it because we pass too little time on this earth. How much it changes the world around us. Right. But very poetic, very. A few of my books that were honorable mentions, or and Lauren Isley too, aren't going to necessarily make me sound like I really care much about humanity.
I've noticed that too.
But they, I think that they're very beautifully done and written. That while I completely understand that perspective of, hey, this is all going to pass, we're kind of problematic actors in it. These are the kinds of books that inspire me to do better and be a better human as we pass through this world. And this collection, The Immense Journey, just puts so much of that into perspective, and would highly recommend it. And I don't even think it's the best book in that boxed set. I would get into something like The Unexpected Universe that comes up a few years later. But boy, these things, when I sat down to start this collection, I didn't have very, high hopes. Mm-hmm. Not because of any, expectation they'd be bad, just didn't have any context, didn't know anything about them. And it's become, one of my favorite books that I own.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. So have you been reading it like in pieces, or did you sit down and kind of read it through, or how did you approach it?
Well, so I did read it through back in 2015, 2016 when it came out from the Library of America, because I was enjoying it so much. It took me a while. I didn't even have the whole thing read when I wrote about it on my blog. Right. I'd read the first volume, and then I spent the next, probably 3 or 4 months reading the second one, just as it came along. But ever since then, I do pull it down quite often just to get back into that headspace. Because, and to that beautiful writing. Again, I didn't pull out a passage, but there, I could, and I probably should have, that just shows how poetic, and I don't mean that to either in a flowery way, but just in a way that the language that he uses punctures that part of me that says, this is not ordinary, this is extraordinary, and is inspiring. So I pull it off the shelf quite often, probably a few times a year. I go and pick out a few of my favorites and then try to read some that I don't remember anything about that one. Right. What is that anymore?
No, you've inspired me. I'm pulling that one down and setting it somewhere where I can't ignore it any longer because it sounds wonderful.
It's because it's essays essentially. Mm-hmm. It really works well as just a book that you dig into, and they're not very long. The Slit's maybe 6 or 7 pages, so you could get through that and already have that, that little bit of inertia moving you forward through it. So I'll recommend it.
Yeah. No, that sounds wonderful. Absolutely. Well, yeah, my first one, I would say, like I said, I was trying to think of the books that kind of kickstarted this focus that I had more recently on nature books. And this is absolutely probably the first one or one of the first couple ones. And it's called The Wild Places, and it's by Robert Macfarlane. Have you heard of it, or have you heard of him?
I've heard of him. I don't know that book though.
Yeah, he is a UK author, and I think right now he's kind of, from what I understand, kind of the most revered nature writer in that area, or one of at least. And so in this particular one, which isn't one that I necessarily hear mentioned as much as some of his other ones, but it's the first one I read and it really struck me. So he starts out with this question, are there genuinely any wild places left in England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. There's a lot of kind of, natural places, but like he's looking for truly wild places. And so over the course of a series of essays, he just basically explores and tries to answer that question. So it's divided into 15 different sections. Each one has a really simple title like Island, Moor, Grave, Salt Marsh, like those types of things. And so he just takes time over, I don't know, it's probably over the course of a few years, and he'll just go visit these areas and just explore. And so it blends really beautiful nature writing along with kind of natural history and then his own personal perspectives a little bit too. It's not a memoir by any means, but he does kind of tie that part into it. I won't spoil anything about what he finds, but let's just say that it definitely has that kind of elegiac and melancholy tone sometimes that I was talking about, as he tries to explore this area and look for the truly wild places. One of my favorite sections of the whole thing, though, comes at the very end. And this is one that was very eye-opening to me. He's explored all these different wild areas. He's slept on the edges of cliffs, and he's walked across these frozen rivers in the middle of the night and had all these crazy adventures. But then at the very end, he's back near his home, and I'm just going to read a quick excerpt here. It says, "Up near the long top of the hill, I found my tree. I climbed up past its familiar marks, the crooked branch, the carved H, the elephant skin, the missing limb, until I reached the observatory. I settled myself on the forked branch and looked out over the land. Standing there in the observatory, I tried to imagine the effects of the wind across Britain and Ireland. I thought east, to the coasts of Norfolk and Suffolk, where it would be urging the sea to shingled plungings. I thought north, where it would be driving the snow hares of the peak into shelter, fraying waterfalls into spray in Cumbrian valleys, and moving the sand at the mouth of the Naver. I thought west, where it would be rushing over the summits of Ben Chuana and Croagh Patrick, scouring the golden island on which I had slept near Rossrow, and probing down into the shearwater burrows on Enley. And I thought south, where it would be stirring the still air inside the Dorset holloways and buffeting the birds on the Essex mudflats. I imagined the wind moving through all these places, and many more like them, places that were separated from one another by roads and housing, fences and shopping centers, streetlights and cities, but that were joined across the space at that time by their wildness in the wind. We are fallen in mostly broken pieces, I thought, but the wild can still return us to ourselves. Then I looked back out across the landscape before me, the roads, the railway, the incinerator tower and the woodlands, Mag's Hill Wood, Nine Wells Wood, Wormwood. The woods were spread out across the land, and were all seething. Wildness was here, too, a short mile south of the town in which I lived. It was set about by roads and buildings. Much of it was menaced, and some of it was dying. But at that moment, the land seemed to ring with a wild light. And so, I think, that's just beautiful and powerful writing. But what it kind of did for me is open up that idea of he had been all over the place exploring all these, what you would think of as these really wild places. And then he came back to this familiar place, but he had a new perspective on it. So it's that whole idea of like, even in your own backyard, there is some wilderness, there are creatures, there are, you could pick this little corner of your yard and just spend time and focus on that. And you would see this whole world that you didn't even think about in a normal day. So yeah, I don't know. That book is just, to me, it was astonishing. It was one of my favorite books probably in the last decade. So anyway, yeah, I could rave on and on about it, but I love that book.
I'm on it. Definitely. As I'm looking here too about, I see that he published Underland in 2019.
Yeah, I thought about adding that one. The same thing that you were just...
That's the one that I'd heard of.
Yeah.
When it came out.
When you were just describing Lauren Isley and talking about that concept of time, much of that book is about something I'm sure he didn't coin the phrase, but it's called deep time. And it's this idea, like you were saying, talk about feeling small within the universe, like delving into the earth and, just exploring. It's like a time machine. And so there's different essays again in that one, but in that one particular one, he goes down into this mine and he's looking at some of these, formations and sediments and different things that are just billions of years old. And it's mind blowing. It gives you the chills. That's another one. He's one I've been parceling out. I have probably 3 or 4 others of his on my shelf that I've heard very good things about, and I'm tempted to just read them all in a big gulp, but I kind of have been parceling them out because I don't want to burn through them. He's still alive and he's still writing, but
it looks like he's about our age.
Yeah, exactly.
He was born in 76, and he's a little bit older than me, but yeah, that's promising. It means maybe some great things are still coming.
Exactly.
Not that he hasn't written great things already. It sounds
no,
like,
absolutely. It's nice when
more.
yeah, like you said, a lot of these people you look back and they've already passed on or whatever, and so you kind of you know what you've got. But with him, it's always exciting to think about where he might go next. And I know he's done some dabblings with children's books and different things too. So I think yeah, it's going to be exciting to see where he goes. But yeah, he's a favorite for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'll go on to my next one, and I decided to try to pick out a book of poetry rather than just an essay collection, which is where my mind went. My mind with nature writing goes to essay collections, really. But this particular book of poetry is Mary Oliver's American Primitive from 1983. It won the Pulitzer Prize. I hate this cover because it's so drab. It's a black and white. It shows a tree branch, but in general, it's just a gray cover.
Right.
For a book of poetry that is so beautiful in nature, and it's got summertime and berries and bees and all kinds of things in here, and it's got this just awful cover. But I don't know. Have you read any of Mary Oliver's poetry, or this one in particular?
I have read poems from her, but I have not. I own a couple of her collections. I have to admit it. She's one I have not dug in further. So it's been kind of here and there, but yeah, she's definitely on my radar.
So this one it's 50 poems, and I don't know if I'd ever really thought of this as nature poetry, but it definitely is. I mean, even on the back cover, it says Mary Oliver's visionary poems enunciate the renewals of nature and the renewals of humanity in love, in oneness with the natural, in union with the things of this world. And it's got, poems in here about the month of May, which we're in right now. This episode will probably come out a little bit later, but there's one called August. There's egrets, mushrooms, it's first snow, vultures, rain in Ohio, things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stop and I'm going to talk about one called The Roses. Because this is how she combines just beautiful writing about nature, I think, while also connecting it with me, with how I'm feeling. It's The Roses. One day in summer, when everything has already been more than enough, the wild beds start exploding open along the berm of the sea. Day after day, you sit near them. Day after day, the honey keeps on coming in the red cups, and the bees, like amber drops, roll in the petals. There is no end, believe me, to the inventions of summer, to the happiness your body is willing to bear.
Wow.
I mean, like I said a second ago, it's May right now, but I love that, that just brings to mind this kind of this hot day.
Yeah.
And thing's too rich. You got these bees rolling around like amber drops in the petals. It just seems too much glorious pleasure.
Right.
And this one always makes me happy. And I like how she says there's no end to the happiness your body is willing to bear.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that line at the beginning. I think you said when everything has already been enough or whatever. I mean, that's beautiful.
Everything has already been more than enough.
More than enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, and not every poem is quite this. I would say this is a pretty joyful poem because I think when everything has already been more than enough can be taken as I'm done with it. It's been too much in a bad way.
I know. I thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it could have been interpreted like at the end of summer sometimes where it's just like at the end of any season, I guess there's always that feeling, at least I get, where it's like you're ready for a change, and it could be interpreted that way. So I think it's interesting that she took it in almost more of a positive way, like you said.
Yeah. It's already been more than enough. And I think she's meaning like we've had enough pleasure and joy and we're feeling really good. And then boom, here's even more.
Yeah, exactly.
So like I say, not every poem has that tone, but I'm feeling upbeat today for the most part. So,
absolutely. That's
so
a
there
good
we
one.
go. But yeah, American Primitive, poems by Mary Oliver. She's just one of our treasures, as far as poets and writers, and this is one of my favorite collections of poetry in general. So
yeah, no, she's one that it's one of those holes that you kind of feel a little bit ashamed of because it's like no matter how much you read, there's always going to be those areas where you're like, well, how have I not read her yet? And she definitely is one for me. she does remind me a little bit, from what I know of. I mentioned Ted Kooser in a previous essay, and I'm not saying they have the same style, but he has a very good balance of, he includes a lot of nature, but with that kind of personal lens sometimes that really draws it together. So yeah, as much as I enjoy him, I definitely need to do a little more exploring with Mary Oliver.
Fun. Well, what do you got next?
Yeah, so next up might be the one that we have in common. We'll see. So this is another book along with Robert Macfarlane that really fueled my interest in nature books. I read them both around the same time, and it's The Peregrine by J.A. Baker.
Bingo.
Bingo. Okay, well then feel free to, we can just turn this part into more of a conversation. But
yeah.
So the way I would summarize it, I think it's set over the course of, basically nearly a year. And it documents Baker as he tracks a pair of peregrine falcons in England. And it's a very fascinating. He grows increasingly obsessive as he follows them from day to day, and he just documents everything they do. And so, at the beginning especially, I feel like it's pretty clinical and precise in his descriptions, but there's also a lot of poetry to the language. But it's super immersive. And along with him, you kind of feel this transformation take place over the course of the book, where he begins to identify more and more closely with the birds. On the jacket copy, it says, as he continues his mysterious private quest, his sense of human self slowly dissolves to be replaced with the beauty of nature, but also the darker side that drives so much of the natural world. And so to me, that was one of the things, like, I've noticed in some nature writing, there's sometimes that obsessive nature to some of it, like with people where, whether it's a hermit or somebody who just goes off and meditates in a cave, or just, there's these different ways of people interacting with nature, but often it's a very solitary or obsessive quest. And that does appeal to me. It's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole idea of like the darker side of nature, I just had another quick excerpt here that I was going to read that I feel like does a really good job of capturing how he balances, it's beautiful, but also it's dark, and there's the reality of what nature truly is. So I'll just start. At 10:30, clouds of small birds sprayed up from the field, and a merlin cleaved through them like an arrow, dipping and darting. It was a thin, narrow falcon, flying low. It swept over the seawall, curved out across the saltings, and swung up into steep spirals, its long, sting-like body swaying in the blur of its jabbing, flicking wings. It flew fast, yet its wide circling seemed laborious and its rising slow. At 300 feet it came round in a long curve and poised, half hovering. Then it flew forward into the wind toward a skylark singing high above the fields. It had seen the lark go up, and had circled to gain height before making an attack. From behind, the merlin's wings looked very straight. They seemed to move up and down with a shallow flicking action, a febrile pulsation, much faster than any other falcon's. It reached the lark in a few seconds, and they fell away toward the west, jerking and twisting together, the lark still singing. It looked like a swallow chasing a bee. They rushed down the sky in zigzags, and I lost them in the green of the distant fields. Their rapid, shifting, dancing motion had been so deft and graceful that it was difficult to believe that hunger was the cause of it, and death the end. The killing that follows the hunting flight of hawks comes with a shocking force, as though the hawk had suddenly gone mad and had killed the thing it loved. The striving of birds to kill, or to save themselves from death, is beautiful to see. The greater the beauty, the more terrible the death. So, wow. I mean, to me, again, it's just like one of those where I read it and it just gives me the chills. Not only it balances the poetical writing with, like, some of those descriptions are very poetical, some of them are very straightforward, and he blends them together so perfectly. And it's just that idea of how even something as gruesome and violent as a hunt has its own beauty to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the one that I put as my number one, I guess, in a way. I mean, so I'll go through it. I know you've still got another one to talk about, so and you've done a great job introducing this one for sure. By the way, did you notice who wrote the introduction to the NYRB Classics edition?
That's funny. I had forgotten that. Yeah. Our buddy Robert Macfarlane.
There you go.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's where I first kind of had the awareness of his name.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was funny as I pulled it up here. I'm going to highlight a passage from page 10 where we get a sense that J.A. Baker doesn't, again, particularly like the human world. Mm-hmm. He says, I have always longed to be a part of the outward life, to be out there at the edge of things, to let the human taint wash away in emptiness and silence as the fox sloughs his smell into the cold unworldliness of water, to return to the town as a stranger. I love that part. I know there's another line there, but I just love, I'll end it with to return to the town as a stranger. And then we go through this whole book of him pursuing these hawks and watching their things through October, November, December, going on and on and on. January. In January, this is page 127. We're not to the end of the book yet. I mean, he goes through April of the next year. He says, I avoid humans, but hiding is difficult now that snow has come. Okay. A hare dashed away with its ears laid back, pitifully large and conspicuous. I use what cover I can. It is like living in a foreign city during an insurrection. There's an endless banging of guns and tramping of feet in the snow. I mean, that's clearly not happening. That's just the way he's viewing the human world, or right. Human activity. One has an unpleasantly hunted feeling. Or is it so unpleasant? I am as solitary now as the hawk I pursue. This is a fantastic book that, I don't even remember why I picked it out and started reading it. But again, captured me from the first few pages and became one that I think back on all of the time. I probably read it, 13 years ago at this point. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I probably read it around the same time. And rereading those passages and listening to you read them, I'm like, why have I only read this once? Like, as much as I love NYRB classics and there's so many favorites, I mean, if I had to pick one, that might be my very favorite. I mean, I know that's a big claim and I'd have to think about it, but
that would be
stunning.
Tough. That's a good episode right there.
Yeah, exactly. We should. Yeah, but I like that, like acknowledging kind of that misanthropic, like, all of us have it to some degree, I would imagine, where whether through work or busyness of errands and schedules or just traffic or all that stuff, like sometimes you get to that point where you just feel like you're going to lose it. And it kind of reminds me of that, I think it's like in the first page of Moby Dick, where he talks about, he always knows it's time to go back to sea when he feels like knocking strangers' hats off into the street. And that whole section, it's kind of like that same idea of just like, I need to get out of here.
Rather than commit suicide. Yes,
exactly.
That's something else.
Yeah.
Well, so what do you have as your last one?
Yeah.
Since that goes through mine too.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last one is where, like I said, I tried to think of one that was a more recent discovery for me. I mean, I think time-wise, it's probably not necessarily any newer than some of the other ones, but it's one that I hadn't heard of until just recently. It's called Sightlines, and it's by Kathleen Jamie. I don't know if you've heard of her, but I get the impression she's another, pretty well known. She's won some awards for nature writing, and it's another collection of essays. I think she's also written some poetry collections, which I'd be interested in picking up. But yeah, this one is a collection of 14 essays, and it's largely focused on the idea of kind of paying close attention to different things. And so it's kind of fascinating because I wouldn't say it's like a traditional nature book, like Robert Macfarlane, maybe, he would focus on different areas of the country or different types of geography. This one has some of that, but she'll spend some time in a Spanish cave that's covered in, prehistoric art, or she'll be out on a ship in the middle of a bunch of icebergs as she watches the Northern Lights. So there are some stuff that probably would be a little bit more like maybe traditional. But two that stand out in my memory. The first one is called Pathologies. So it's like takes place shortly after the death of her mother. Her mother dies of, I believe it's cancer or it's of a disease for sure. So she begins to think about just the definition of nature. So in her words, everything else, not just primroses and otters, like not all the fun, fluffy, kind of the bees rolling in honey type of an idea, but also things like bacteria and disease and kind of the other sides of nature. So in this essay, she goes to this pathology lab and she's guided through by this scientist, and they're looking at this tumor under this really powerful microscope. And he's kind of giving her this tour of the slide, showing her all the different areas. And so earlier in the essay, she had been flying, I think it might've been to her mother's funeral, if I remember right. And so she's just looking down from on high on all the natural landscapes and describing them. So then she makes this really interesting connection as she's looking through the microscope. She starts to describe what she's saying in much of the same kind of language, like she's looking at a landscape from up above. So it's very fascinating. And it's just one of those things, like you talked about, kind of opening your eyes to the other parts of nature that you don't necessarily even like to focus on, but it's still a part of nature, So, and then the other one that really stood out to me, she visits what's called the Whale Hall at the Bergen Natural History Museum in Norway. And so she's kind of walking around the scaffolding. They've put up all this scaffolding to clean. Like a lot of museums, they have a lot of the whale skeletons that are hanging in the rafters. And so apparently it's been decades since they've been cleaned. And so they're doing this major cleaning project, and she's able to kind of get up on the scaffolding and walk around among these giant skeletons. And so, she uses this lens or this frame to kind of discuss everything from the history of the whale, from like an evolutionary perspective, to the ways that humans have devastated the species. It's just a very interesting thing. So just a really quick excerpt for this time. This is her. She's up on the scaffolding sitting inside of the actual whale skeleton. She says, 2 or 3 times on my visit, I sat under the blue whale's jaw, or even within the cage of its chest, the thick portcullis of its ribs descending around. You got used to the scale, even to holding conversations in these surrounds. To sit within the creature's ribcage was like being in a very strange taxi, caught in traffic. But you could conduct a thought experiment. You could sit within the blue whale and look back, following the spine with your eyes as it voyaged above the hull, curving very slightly, continuing between the other whales, suspended every few yards by those chains and rods, until it tapered to an end far away. Then there would have been the tail, too, something the width of a small aircraft. Despite the size, you could, with a minimum of effort, extend your sense of self and imagine this was your body moving through the ocean. You could begin to imagine what it might feel like to be a blue whale. So that was just, one little excerpt, but that, it's just that whole idea of, like you said, getting outside of yourself, thinking of the natural world without a human lens, or maybe with a human lens, but also with other lenses attached. So yeah, I would highly recommend. She's another one. Like I said, it's a recent discovery. I've bought 2 other collections by her since then, and have been kind of saving them as well. But I could see her becoming another favorite.
I've never heard of that book, never heard of her. So that, and I really like that passage that you just read. I feel like I've got a lot of homework to do, and pleasurable homework. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I am too. It's one of those, like we've talked about before, just the discoveries of no matter how much you read and how much time you spend thinking about books, there's always more out there.
Oh, for sure. And hopefully in a good way, in an exciting way,
absolutely,
rather than a depressing way.
Speaking of more books to read, did you want to do a quick kind of honorable mentions or other books that you have on your radar?
Yes, for sure. So I put down, I was thinking about Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, speaking of a Thoreau disciple.
Exactly.
I also thought of John Krakauer's Into Thin Air or Into the Wild.
Yeah.
I thought of Aldo Leopold's A Sand County Almanac, and then 2 novels. I think I said earlier 1 novel, but one of them is John Williams' Butcher's Crossing, which is one of those books that made me want to come back and live in the West again. And then the other one that I was thinking of too is the one that came out last year from NYRB Classics, Henri Bosco's Maliqua. Have you heard of that one? Or did you read that one last year when everyone was kind of talking about it?
Yeah, I did. I read it last year. Really good.
What are some of your honorable mentions that you almost put on your list today?
I'll jump through a few of these. I mean, I feel like some of these I've probably already touched on, but Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. I mean, that book is just amazing. I think I've talked about it before. There's a specific part where he's tubing down through this river that's about to be turned into a reservoir. And so it's kind of the last times that he and his friend are ever going to be able to see these sites that they're seeing. I mean, that one just has stuck with me for years. Terry Tempest Williams, I don't know if you've read her, but anything by her that I've read always blows me away. When Women Were Birds and The Hour of Land in particular really were 2 that really resonated with me. Of course, Barry Lopez, Helen MacDonald, H is for Hawk, and then she has a new one, Vesper Flights, which I've not read yet. Annie Dillard, we talk about her all the time. There's one called a guy named Bernd Heinrich. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he has written a lot of books about ravens. And I haven't read those, but I did read one called A Year in the Maine Woods, where he just goes up and stays in this cabin for a year. And that one's really good. And then the last 2 that kind of popped to mind for me are River Runs Through It by Norman Mclean, which I just reread the last 4 paragraphs of that the other day. I mean, it gives me the chills every time I read those last 4 paragraphs. That book's so good. And then one of our favorites, our mutual favorites, Patrick Lee Firmer, just him journeying on foot across Europe, during that time right before World War II. Some of the nature writing in that is just fabulous, in addition to all the other stuff that's going on in those books. So those are some that popped to mind for me immediately.
Well, and both of those last ones. One that was on my list was River Runs Through It by Norman Mclean. One of the only books that makes me like the summer heat.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, if I read it, I love this summer heat, and if I don't, I don't like it. And that's like my antidote to the summer. And then Patrick Lee Firmer, I hadn't put him on my list, but yeah, there's a lot of great nature writing, not just in that trilogy, but in his other books about like Cappadocia and in Turkey and did you ever read A Time for Silence? Is that what it's called? It's about him going to a monastery for a month and where he has to be quiet.
Yeah, that one's. I don't remember. I can't remember if I picked it up or if it's on. Yeah, but when I read about it, it sounds fascinating. I would love to get that one.
Very good. Not quite nature writing, but maybe some of the same ideas of getting away from the rushes of the city and London and life like that, and being a time for silence. Having to learn to be quiet. And in your head like that.
Real quickly, I mean, I have a couple that are just on my radar, ones that I would like I can't recommend them, but they're just ones I plan to read first. And I would just, if I could buzz through those real fast. Are you still going on your recommendations though?
No, I'm done. And my recommendation is very similar. I have no knowledge about the books themselves, but I have a reason for recommending them that I hope will still make sense.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll just buzz through these real fast, but there's a book called The Outermost House that's been on my radar. And again, some of these I don't know too much about, but they're just on my to be read nature pile. Ian Fraser has written quite a few different books.
And I've read a few of his, and I really do like them a lot. Yeah.
Great Plains in particular is one that keeps calling out to me.
And that's one of the ones I've read. You would definitely.
Okay. Your buddy Isley is definitely high on my list to read. Yeah. Leaves of Grass. I've read snippets of it, but I would like to just sit down and make my way through the entire thing. And I know that might be kind of a loose definition of nature writing, but there are parts of it that certainly are. And then one that was recommended to me on social media is called The Meadow by James Galvin. Again, I don't know too much, but I think it's kind of one of those where it focuses on one specific place, which, as I've said, kind of fascinates me. Like when somebody just focuses on one particular meadow or part of a state. So that's another one. And then the last two, The Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson and the whole trilogy by William Least Heat Moon that I think I've talked about a little bit with Prairie Earth and Blue Highways, and I can't remember the third one. But anyway, those are just all ones that are like on my big pile of nature books that I want to read very soon. So,
now let me kind of give my recommendation. Then I don't know if you have other just a general recommendation you want to give to wrap things up, but this will be mine. Later on this year, the Library of America is releasing Rachel Carson's The Sea Trilogy. That includes Under the Sea Wind, The Sea Around Us, and The Edge of the Sea. These look fantastic. I think they were just released earlier this year in the UK. And I remember John Self tweeting the covers and things like that. And I thought, well, that looks great. What do we have here in the US? Well, this is coming out.
Oh, cool.
The Sea Around Us actually won the National Book Award. But yeah, let me kind of read a little bit. It says, pioneering environmentalist Rachel Carson explores the wonders of the Earth's oceans in these classics of American science and nature writing. Rachel Carson is perhaps most famous as the author of Silent Spring, but she was first and foremost a poet of the sea. And the 3 books collected in this deluxe Library of America volume are classics of American science and nature writing. And then, like I say, there's Under the Sea Wind from 1941, The Sea Around Us from 1951, and then The Edge of the Sea from 1955. And yeah, I mean, this is her writing about the ocean and troubles and environmentalism, 75 years ago.
Yeah.
80 years ago, and how much different, boy, what would she feel now if she went and
I know. And that's what I always think about when I read some of those. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm going to pick that one up for sure. I have The Sea Around Us. I do have a battered old used copy that I picked up in a used bookstore. And I think I have the Silent Spring too. But yeah, I would love those editions are so beautiful.
It looks like it'll be a special, just a nice thing to own, because the other thing about Library of America is they have their notes and sections and things in there that kind of add to the book in ways that I like. So.
I can picture you already clearing out a little space next to your Lauren Isley to slide that box set right next to it.
Oh, I maybe misspeaking. Maybe it's not a box set, because it would be just 3 books.
Oh, okay. Well, either way.
So it's probably just a single volume. I apologize, but I've seen the cover, and all their books tend to look alike with that black cover.
Yeah, no,
this one doesn't. This one has kind of a more flashy, naturey cover, and maybe that's why I misspoke and said box set. But yeah, I think it's just one volume, but still will look great by Lauren Isley. For
Absolutely. Sure. Oh, that's great. Well, I do have just a quick recommendation. It's not quite as highbrow as what you were just talking about, but I do feel like it ties in nicely with the nature theme. So during the pandemic, when it comes to like family TV time, we were drawn to kind of comfort watching. So we would watch like the British Baking Show or different things like that. And so on Amazon Prime, they are streaming the entire series of Bob Ross's The Joy of Painting. I don't know about you, but for me,
that ties in perfect what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, granted we couldn't watch them streaming, so it was always like a sick day when I was at home and I happened to be flipping through on PBS, he'd be there. But talk about just peaceful, calming, just like about as pure as it gets. I love it. And so I was introducing my kids to it, and I didn't know what they would think because I didn't know how much of it was tied up in nostalgia for me. Oh, they're captivated. They love it. They'll sit there spellbound, just like I have always been. His calming voice and just the sounds of the paintbrush against the canvas and everything. So, but yeah, I mean, he has a huge focus on nature, and that's one of the things as I'm rewatching these. Yes, he'll talk about the craft, but he also takes this time to say how important it is to spend time looking at nature. I go out and talk to trees, he'll say, or different things like that, or he'll just like sit there by the river. And that's kind of how he learns how to paint clouds and how to paint water. And so, yeah, to me, it's good on so many levels. It's good for just a comfort watch, but I've never painted anything. Like I said, I'm a terrible artist, never, it's not that part of it. I mean, that does appeal to me just to watch a master at work, but to me also, it's just his talk about nature and seeing him transform these beautiful scenes. So it's streaming on Amazon Prime. You can see, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of episodes, so you can dip in and out or just watch them back to back or however you want to do it. But we've been really enjoying that.
No, that's a perfect way to. I watched a bunch of those fairly recently too. Just it's calming and encouraging and kind of like, hey, things are going to be okay.
Exactly. No, it's very affirming, and just like I said, during the pandemic where we were feeling, very disillusioned and sometimes scared or sometimes unsettled, it was just a great way to kind of, watch that and just feel some comfort and some joy.
All right, listeners, we'll be back here in a couple of weeks with another episode on some random book topic.
Exactly.
And having a great time with us. If you have any questions or want to reach out to us, any things that you want to suggest for topics, we'd love to hear them. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. You can follow the Mooks and the Gripes and get show notes and book and film reviews at mooksandgripes.com. On Twitter, you can follow Trevor at Mooks and Paul at BiblioPaul. You can also get information about future shows on our Patreon. If you'd like to donate to the show, anything and everything, even $1 a month helps and is deeply appreciated. You can become a Patreon at patreon.com/mooks. Until next time.